Hey guys, welcome to the Revive Stronger podcast. I'm your host, as always, Steve Hall, and today another special episode, and this time I think it's probably the people choice of podcast episode, and that is a Q&A with Dr. Mike, always popular, and as ever, a fantastic chat. We cover things like, is the stretch important to feel during exercises? We cover questions relating to NOR and rep drop-offs. Really great practical information during this podcast. And for those of you who have signed up and are running or soon will be running the mini cup, welcome to the mini cup movement. And for those of you who didn't manage to get in this time, there definitely be future ones going ahead. Make sure you're still on the waiting list and you'll get an email to know when they're kicking about. But for now, let's get into the episode. Cheers. Hi guys, welcome to the Revive Stronger podcast. I'm your host, as always, Steve Hall, and today I have Mike Israetel back on the show for a Q&A, and I know you guys love these, and they're always great catching up with Mike. Actually, I know I normally try and do a bit of a what's Mike up to, and I know it wasn't that long ago since you came on, where you just finished your mini cut, and I think you've actually been in a bit of a kind of active recovery phase, and now you're back into things, right? Is that how things have moved since?
I finished massing. I hit like somewhere between 247 and 250 pounds in the morning for a few days. I felt like absolute crap because there was just so much weight. It's funny because there's pictures of me on Instagram from that time, and I have like literally have veins up my quads and in my abs. They're like, "Oh, you're lean. You should feel good." Like, nope. I was pushing so much food that I was like, I just want. Like, I remember we went to it was in Las Vegas, and some friends and I went to a sushi, all you can eat sushi place. We were sitting outside in the heat before we got in, and I was like, I'm going to die out here. I'm going to die. And then we went into the sushi place. It was air conditioned, but like there was tons of people in there post COVID, not enough air conditioning. And the kitchen is hot. And then I ended up having usually I have 40 or 50 pieces of sushi. I had 15 and I was like, I can't do this. I can't eat anymore. And I made up for it in other ways, drinking mass gainer shakes and stuff. But then I finished that mass phase. And then I just finished 2 days ago, 2 weeks of active rest, which went super, super well. And now I'm ramping back up as far as training. Over the next 5 weeks, I'll actually be ramping up auto-regulation style with volumes and loads. And it'll be really great. And then once I'm ramped, I deload. And then I begin a fat loss diet for probably a show in December. So that's
very exciting status. I know last prep was hopefully every new prep is the most successful prep, but you got leaner than I think anyone has ever seen you. You had legit glute striations, everything was there.
My first real prep. I mean, my first really successful prep.
I think you look at on average, most people, their first time competing, it's never the best and it only gets better. And that's the epitome of what you want as a bodybuilder. So that's awesome. It must give you some sort of joy. It does for me, even to put your first competition photos versus your last. It's just your mind just boggles. How is this the same human?
Sure. For me, there's a bit of a bittersweet idea there because most of the reason for the difference is body water fluid management. Okay. And it was not actually because I dieted harder or figured out I'd die better. It's all drugs, So, people were saying for years I didn't know how to get lean. And turns out I was really lean a bunch. I just couldn't show it with water. And this time people would ask me after the show, oh my God, you had striated glutes. How did you do it? I was like, well, actually, it was an easier diet than most. And they're like, what? The first show I dieted for some total of 7 months. And there was entire stretches of 3 or 4 weeks at a time where I ate 1,000 calories a day of only protein and veggies. Yeah, I could barely think. I could barely walk. It was the hardest diet I've ever done. I probably never diet as hard again. It's kind of pointless. And then I stepped on stage with probably 25 pounds of excess body water. And I just didn't know about estrogen management, didn't know about diuretics, didn't know about androgenic drive for body water retention, and just had no idea. So I did this very stupid thing. I guess the lesson to learn from there is hire a coach early. I thought I was smarter than everyone. I was going to do it myself. And it turns out that being smart is nice, but the accumulated wisdom of decades of experience beats intelligence almost every time. So lesson learned.
I guess at least credit to you for continuing to go. I know that would have been it's been hard for you to every time's got better, but I can't imagine many people stick to it when they've pushed that hard and still haven't seen the results they were after. So,
well, it's funny enough, Steve. So this is something Jared and I had a conversation about. Most of my diets up until this last one were I would diet. The diet would get harder. The cardio would get more voluminous, so on and so forth. And I wouldn't look much better for weeks on end, because as I lost fat, I increased the amount of androgen I was taking, and the amount of diet fatigue rose. So the amount of body water would rise. It would roughly displace the fat. So what ended up happening was it would just look the same. And I'd wake up in the morning after, peeing several times at night, and in my upper body or something, I would catch a glimpse of like unreal crazy striations and veins. I was like, oh, like I got to be sort of lean. And then by the end of the day, I would have like poofy, jiggly love handles full of water. And I was like, okay. And I didn't know how much of that was water or fat. And, because everyone, there's that, oh, it's just body water. You don't want to be that guy. Like, I was like, no, I'm still clearly fat. And it was basically like, I think Jared told me, he was like, dude, I can't believe how fucking much you push through it. He's like, if I didn't get better week to week when I was dieting, I would have quit years ago.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, I sure thought about it, but I'm stupid enough to keep going. So, because, like at the end of the day, I was like, thermodynamics never misses.
Yeah.
Thermodynamics never misses. I have to be losing fat, because I wasn't losing strength. And I was at an unbelievable deficit. And I was feeling all the effects of the deficit. And I was like, what the fuck's going on? And then finally, to be completely honest, Broderick Chavez recommended a drug called aldactone, which directly attacks the pathway of androgen-mediated body water retention. And after like 1 week on aldactone, I woke up and had completely striated glutes. And I was like, what the fuck? And then I ate a bunch of salt, drank a bunch of water, still on aldactone, because actually I got COVID-19 that weekend, so I couldn't compete. And I was like, all right, competition's over. I'm still on aldactone just to see kind of how it would do the fluid dynamics. And I ate, it was still clean eating, but like much more salt and much more water. When I've already started restricting salt and water, so the rebound was pretty nasty. And I woke up the next day exactly as striated and dry. And I was like, what the fuck? And I was just like, this is total bullshit. This is amazing. It's just like one fucking pill solved all my problems. And I was like, okay, I'm an 8. I feel like such a fucking moron for all these years of bullshit. And I took Broderick Chavez to set me straight. So,
I know this is what Jared says is like peaking for naturals is so simple, because we don't have this body, like we have a bit of water retention from stress, what have you, but you have a few good night's sleep, some more carbs, you deload 100%. A bit. It's not a big deal. Whereas 25 pounds of water is no joke. That's like a whole contest prep worth of fat. So
it's if you weigh 250 pounds, 25 pounds is the equivalent of 10% body fat visually. Steve, that's like you never even started your diet, which hilariously, if you look at my first show pics, it looks like I never even started my diet.
Well,
awful.
I think we're all excited for what you're going to bring this year. I think I also saw Charlie said he was going to compete this season. Is that right? Is he considering that? I think I saw it on his Instagram.
Unless something goes terribly wrong, Charlie is going to shock people, because Charlie has been rebounding from his show intelligently, of course. Everything's planned. I saw Charlie in person a week ago. And Steve, I got to be honest, Charlie was always, or recently anyway, really jacked. He looks 3-dimensional now. His front to back thickness doesn't make any sense. He just doesn't look like Charlie. He looks like, you'd look at him walking in the street and you're like, pro bodybuilder. He doesn't look like a wrestler. He doesn't look like a powerlifter. He has that weird poofiness to his muscles that you're just like, your body ran out of space to put regular muscle, and it's just now adding. It's like a house somebody adds a bunch of extra rooms to, and you're like, that looks stupid. That's what he looks like. I don't want to spoil the surprise, but within the next few weeks, Charlie's going to hit 270 pounds. And he's pretty lean.
He's like 5'10", 5'11".
5'11", yeah. And so he's going to hit 270 in his off season. And he might even go to 275 before it's all said and done. And remember that with Charlie, we don't use a lot of special sports supplements in the off season. We ramp them up pretty decently in the contest prep. The last time he did prep, he didn't lose any weight. Yeah. Now he's going to lose weight this time, not much. So we're looking for Charlie to step on stage at 250-ish.
Wow.
Which is like kind of trippy. And also we didn't use a couple of tricks to make him extra lean and extra dry last time, and we will be using them this time. So if I was going to nationals and I was a super heavy, I would be looking at Charlie and being like, God damn it, I hope he fucks this up, because he might not win, but he's going to come in and look so much better than last time. I think he's one of these guys that if he just keeps iterating the same process over and over and stays healthy, which we keep track of a ton, he's just kind of destined for a pro card. And it's just, he's that guy. So he's got those lines. When you saw his last show, he's got classic lines.
Yeah, he has.
What the fuck? And you're like, oh, that guy looks pretty good. Because he also has like a big head for what's supposed to be his body. And you're like, oh, he's not that big. Like in pictures, he looks whatever. Everyone who ever meets Charlie in real life is like, Jesus Christ. I didn't know you were 6 feet tall. Like I thought, I don't know. I don't know. It just not supposed to look that big. And he's enormous. He makes me look super small in real life, which is like one hell of a feat. So it's interesting. Charlie's off to a real good thing. And Jared is about to do the Tijuana Pro, and Jared's out of body fat. He ran out of body fat weeks ago. And none of us are really sure what's going on with his body anymore. He's got weird striations, places you're not supposed to have striations. Tell you what, he has trouble talking a lot because his skin is so sunken into his face that it's pulling his jaw when he talks. Like, what the fuck is that? So, like you look at his face, you look at like a jacked bodybuilder, and you're like, oh, he looks real good. You look at Jared now, you're like, is he going to be okay? Like, that's a real death camp kind of look. And we'll see if he peaks properly, he's going to do some cool shit. And here's a prediction, Jared. I haven't made this to Jared yet. Jared's off-season next rebound, he's gained so much muscle during this prep. This next off-season rebound, Jared's going to be, mark my words, if he stays healthy, which is probably going to happen, he's going to be like 240 to 250 with abs and veins and striations in like a few months after a show. I don't know if he's going to do the Olympia or not, because it's not much time for the rebound. If he qualifies for the Olympia, then fuck, he's going to do the Olympia. But even if he doesn't, if he takes an off season this fall, he's going to look completely insane. And funny thing about Jared is we've been trying to like back off on his leg training because we want him to do well in Classic. He has to fill out his back more. His legs are way bigger than they need to be for Classic, but they just keep growing. So if he ever switches to the Open, his legs are going to get to this point where Stevie does like 6 work sets for his quads per week. If he goes to like 10 per week, I don't even know what's going to happen. So it's and I will say the dosing he's using for special sports supplements is like what most people in the industry would call comedy or a lie. Most people look at Jared that have been around bodybuilding and you say, oh, he's taking this. They'd be like, he's lying. There's no way he's taking this. But, people thought he was taking drugs and he was natural and stepping on stage at 186. And now he's stepping on stage at 215. And they're like, well, he's on the kitchen sink. Like, just wait till he's on the kitchen sink, and then you'll be like, oh, I guess it's like, Kai Green. People accuse Kai Green of being on drugs when he turned pro, drug-free at 210 pounds at 5'7". And then he actually started drugs a year later. And the next time he did a pro show, like Keystone Pro, he was like 235. And they were like, okay, must have started growth hormone insulin. And he actually started growth hormone insulin a cycle after that. And the next time he's on stage, he was 265. And they're like, okay, I can believe that he was drug-free at 210. I've had this conversation before. A few years ago, this was a big debate where people were saying that, what's the natty limit? And they were saying if you're over 200 pounds muscular at any reasonable height, you have to be on drugs. My question back was like, so what do you guys think Big Ramy would be if he was drug free? And they're like, wow, like 190 or 200. I'm like, okay, so he's 335 with veins and striations in his off season. You think you can gain that much muscle off steroids and growth? Like you just never take it. It was like, I want those guys to start pinning and be like, I'm going to get huge. And 6 months later, they're like, I want to gain 5 pounds of muscle. Am I doing something wrong? Like, no, this is exactly what you should be expecting. Like, I fully believe Big Ramy, drug-free, could have stepped on stage between 230 and 240 pounds. That's elite genetics. People just don't have an appreciation for that. Jared Feather has very, very much elite genetics, and it's super exciting to see what he's going to do. As a person, he's a piece of shit. Everyone knows that already. But as a bodybuilder, I'm just kidding. He's great. But it's really, really exciting stuff. Right? All of that trifecta of people, me, Charlie, and Jared. I'm nobody to talk about. Good God, I feel kind of dickless around those guys.
I feel that way just looking at any of you. So I'm just like,
there you go.
I put a jumper on. I don't look like I lift. It's just like, what's going on here?
Hey, I put on a what's a jumper? A jumper's like a sweatshirt, t-shirt. What is that?
Same thing. Yeah.
Yeah. When I put one of those on, I just look like I'm fat. There's actually one of the powerlifting meme pages made a meme of me with like Homer Simpson where he looks fat and he takes off the t-shirt, but it's just fat shaped muscle. Like that's me. So anyway, you and I, Steve, we just don't have that it factor, I guess.
That tiny waist, like boulder shoulders, the bubbly look. I know exactly what you mean, and they do have it. They definitely do have it. So, actually, I saw your comment on Jared's Instagram post where you're like, "We're trying to make your legs smaller" or something along those lines. Like, we're pulling back, and I was like, "Are you joking? They look huge." So this explains
serious.
it.
Yeah. And Steve, did you see how like wide they were in the front relaxed pose? There's this width to them. There's just like, and there's this adductor vein. Like, all right, like I don't even know what you're doing.
The good girls.
Like bad girls, good girls, girls that are intermediately, moralistic, because who knows? Jared's been doing a lot of girls, you know what I mean? Hey, all right, enough jokes.
What was I going to say? I had something in mind, but I think it's left my head. So I'm going to move to the next topic.
Hey, Pascal here. I just wanted to take a moment to talk about our membership site. Inside, you'll find a thriving forum, an extensive exercise library, courses, presentations, and research reviews. All I need you to do is hit the link in the description below and sign up.
We'll get to Rob Smith's question then, which he has asked. Do you differentiate between technique for hypertrophy for strength versus bodybuilding, or powerlifting versus bodybuilding, I guess?
Steve, can you rephrase that? So is the question being asked, is there a different technique for hypertrophy and a different technique for strength? Or is there a different technique for strength in bodybuilding or strength in powerlifting?
So he has asked, do you differentiate for technique for hypertrophy? So it's hypertrophy for both, for strength and for bodybuilding. So the goal is hypertrophy.
Yes. So when you're a powerlifter or a strength athlete, you want your exertion, your what's called intent to move, which is how fast you're trying to move the bar concentrically, to never be just slow. You want it to be pretty much explosive all the time. And you want to move the bar concentrically as fast as possible. So you want to have what we call maximum intent to move. And the style of execution, even if you're doing hypertrophy for strength related, even if it's hypertrophy, but it's for a strength related outcome, then, you're going to involve exercises that are using, they're nominally the same, like you're squatting for both, but your squat is going to incorporate more musculature if you're training it for strength, even if it's for hypertrophy, because you want that sort of coordinated central massive force production. So for example, if you're squatting high bar for hypertrophy, you may put more load on the bar. You may sit back further. Yes, it's still high bar, but you still want to involve the glutes a lot, still the spinal rectors. Your quads get a big hit, but you want to stay close to that side of an integrated high force producing movement that allows you to lift the most weight. So if I'm training guys for hypertrophy and strength training, they may do 455 pounds for 4 sets of 8. And they're trying really hard and they're sitting back and deep and they're using as much muscle mass as possible, as long as they're still doing high bar, not leaning over super far. We're not super keen on them doing this kind of super muscle specific targeting technique, because hypertrophy just occurs with volume, and we still need it to be something that that carries over to strength really well. Because as soon as you're done high bar squatting, you go back to low bar. You want the strength to carry over. You don't want to be easy on your glutes. You don't want to be easy on your adductors or your lower back, on your bracing. So you treat the high bar squat as just a slightly different variant of the low bar squat. The positioning is different by a little bit, but the intent is really kind of the same. The concentric, as soon as you hit bottom, you go come back up really fast, really drive into that bar. Whereas for hypertrophy purposes, pure bodybuilding hypertrophy, mind muscle connection is king. So instead of using 455 for sets of 8, you might use 365 for sets of 8. You might slow the eccentric more. You might take more pauses. You, instead of squatting back and down, you squat a little bit back and then down and actually forward. Steve, like when you really push your knee forward and you really feel your quads tensing, but there's not a lot of you can't lift hardly as much weight like that. It's turning every exercise into a little bit more isolation-y than it would normally be. And, are you focused on producing a huge amount of concentric force? No, you just need to get the bar back to its upper position. You really ride and milk the eccentric and then come back up using your quads to come back up, as opposed to just muscling your way up. So it's quite different. Now, so just before anyone takes this a little out of context, if you have been lifting up to 5 years or even 7 years, you just do the good technique, do the exercises. Don't you worry about all that stupid bullshit. Mind muscle connection hardly matters at all. As you get more advanced, this kind of stuff starts to get more particular. A really good case in point is Charlie. His last video he posted as of this recording, it was today. He's doing a set of 5 in the high bar squat with 505 pounds. And the way he's doing it, he's super slow eccentric. He's sitting forward into his quads. He's taking a pause at the bottom. If Charlie switched to regular high bar, like a power lifter would do for accessories, 600 for 5 in a few weeks would be easy. He's good for, I've seen him do in, was it knee wraps? I think it was knee wraps or sleeves. I think in knee wraps, he has done, they weren't very tight. He's done like, I think I saw him do like 725 or 735 for 6 or 7 reps. No, just as deep, maybe a little bit shallower, but like that kind of shit. That's like, so right, but he's so much bigger and stronger than he was when he did that. I have no doubt that if he did regular powerlifting style high bar, he'd be in the 650 plus range for sets of 5. In the high bar squat, no problem. Who the hell is he getting anything out of 505? It's that meticulous technique. The question is why? Twofold. One, we want to make sure we're targeting the quads. You don't want to be a bodybuilder and be like, hey, man, I hit a bunch of high bar PRs. And someone's like, your quads must be huge. You're like, well, I think my glutes did actually most of the work. Like, yay, slow clap. We weren't trying to do that. The other is systemic fatigue and injury. I mean, injury, like with powerlifting, you got to lift heavy. Yes, that is more injurious, but there's literally just no way around that. Like, it's like saying, look, oh, I really like to race cars, but those cars go fast and I could get in an accident. Like, they're not going to slow down anytime soon. Kind of the whole point. But for bodybuilding, first of all, it reduces injury. And second of all, the systemic fatigue is a world apart. Bodybuilding is about smashing as much volume as you can recover from and still grow from. And if you do all kinds of exercises that not even really training the quads very specifically anymore, but are putting a shitload of axial fatigue and systemic fatigue, look, Steve, like 650 pounds for sets of 5, you will pay a price that's measured in weeks of fatigue, not hours or days. 505 for sets of 5 for someone that's strong, by the end of the week, you're pretty good to go. And there's your second quad workout and you feel quite fine. So there is a big difference there for the advanced. So as you get very big and very strong, if you're really starting to go towards bodybuilding, really starting to go towards strength sport, keep those differences set in mind. And just at the margins, go a little bit more towards that. So it doesn't mean you have to renorm all your weightlifting or all your weight training. So I'm a bodybuilder now. It's all slow eccentrics and super focused. Just as you go over the months and years more into bodybuilding, just try a little bit more of eccentric control, a little bit more of focus on the muscle, not worrying so much about your concentric speed, just making sure you're really good, getting really good contraction. So like on a bench press, instead of going at the top and really pushing it through, try to push with your pecs. Oh yeah, I'm getting a good contraction. And then slow eccentric deep stretching, big pause, and then push through your pecs. Don't worry about going fast. Worry about using the musculature you want. And the research on Mind Muscle Connection shows that it does make a difference at the margins. And look, if you can use 300 pounds instead of 320 pounds for the same thing, less fatigue, less chance of injury, the same or more stimulation to the target muscles, you're winning all around. Whereas like, that's how I lift weights. And one of my friends, Joe Sullivan, he's one of the best powerlifters of all time, like in the hack squat, we're roughly equal as far as how much we can do sets and reps. I'm actually a little bit ahead of him. And, but in the actual low bar powerlifting squat, he's probably got me by like 300 pounds, 250, that's not even close. We're like the same size. And how the hell did that happen? Well, our quads are roughly the same size, except he's really good at using his quads in an integrated manner with the rest of his body. And I'm just not. So the good news is for me, why would I try to squat? I don't have the genetics he does, or probably the work effort or willpower to get under such heavy weights. But like, I could, if I change my training squat, I could probably as much as 700 pounds. This question is why. It would just be extra injury risk. And what the hell for? As a matter of fact, Joe was a few months back, he was taking a heavy squat out and he like ripped part of his calf off his bone. Steve, his calf. How the fuck do you rip your calf squatting? Well, the answer is when you have 700 plus pounds in the bar, it's really just like a giant like question mark gamble as to what the fuck is going to rip, because your body's like, what the fuck? So you hear like reports of like people who get into car accidents, smash bones you're not supposed to be able to smash. Like, oh, your pelvis broke. How the fuck do you break your pelvis? Like, well, it's 70 miles an hour. There's no rules anymore. You're just like a little puzzle piece going, shaking around. Under 700, 800 pounds, that's what happens. So to me, is a little bit sad when bodybuilders will do like, I worked up to 455 on the incline for a set of 3. And I'm just like, what are you doing? And then they're like, oh man, I felt a tweak in my pec. Like, oh my God, what is it at those crazy weights and that coordinated movement to try to go as fast as possible on the way up? What is it that you're looking for? There's nothing to find there. As you get bigger and stronger and you're a bodybuilder, you got to make sure to slow down those reps on the eccentric at least. You got to get a good mind-muscle connection and make sure that the technique you pick stimulates the targeted muscle and not worried about anything else. And then that way you could stay much safer than you would be and get bigger and bigger muscles the whole time.
Fantastic. I really like that. I think that, I mean, it all shouts, I don't know what word, but it's like specificity towards the sport completely. So I think I'm right in saying this as well, in terms of you wouldn't want to go too high in repetitions probably for powerlifting, because it's just quite far away from the specificity of the sport.
Yes. So I think the question was on the technique.
Yeah.
And on the repetitions, it's absolutely sets of 5 to 10. Maybe 10 to 12 is the most you'd want to go in most cases in powerlifting, because it's plenty enough volume to get you really good growth, but it never retrains your nervous system away from using relatively heavy loads. Like if I'm used to doing sets of 5 to 10, for me to come back and do strength with 3 to 6, I mean, it's literally like a few weeks later, I'm clued in and I'm doing 3 to 6 and I'm getting great technique, great everything. Steve, can you imagine doing sets of 15 to 20 on leg extensions and hack squats, and then coming back to low bar squats for sets of 3? Dude, your first day, your training partners will be like, how much do you want for like a hard set of 5? And you're like, I don't know. It's been months. Like, I don't even know. And hey, whatever you did months ago, if you put that on the bar, you're like, dude, this is more than my max right now. Like your nervous system has no idea what to do with it. You forgot all the technique that goes with it. You forgot how to produce a ton of force. So it's really good idea for powerlifters to stay closer to that level of specificity. A similar analogy is like, people ask, like, in MMA, should the guys who do mixed martial arts train in the gi? Like with the kimono thing that you grab? And the answer is almost certainly not, because a bunch of the stuff with the gi is like, you're not going to have a gi on a guy when you're fighting them. And it's just like, oh, I'm going to grip here. Wait, it doesn't exist. Like, what am I learning this for if not to compete in gi? It's like, it just goes like this really quick. It's, if you have like, all pilots can train on a basic Cessna propeller plane and it just teaches the fundamentals of flying. Once you start to want to be an airline pilot, if someone's like, hey, you want to jump in the F-16 fighter and do some loops and it'll make you better at being a pilot, you're like, will it though? And it's going to teach me a lot of stuff about the F-16, but at some point it's one of these. So, again, if you're just learning how to fly, if you're just getting into lifting, even up to 5 to 7 years into lifting, just do good technique and do a good job. Don't worry about all this crap. And then as you get more advanced, it's kind of going to bring itself to your attention, because you're going to have workouts where you're like, I got 3 extra reps today on high bar squat. I hit a PR. My hips hurt. My spine hurts. My brain hurts. I honestly don't have a quad pump. And then you're going to be like, okay, it's time for me to like relook at this whole technique situation. Someone that did that unbelievably well and improved his technique a ton is, I'm going to do his British name. It's not how you say his name in his original language. Cuba, over there in the UK. Yeah. Because I don't know, he's like probably of Polish ancestry or something, or Czechoslovakian. We'd say Kuba in Russian, but there's this huge transformation over the past like 2 years, year and a half, where he just like, I think one day just showed up and he's like, I'm just not doing any more bullshit in the gym. I'm just not swinging around lifting crazy heavy weights. His loads reduced like crazy. His technique improved by 1,000,000,000%. And all of a sudden he's like the biggest and most muscular he's ever been. And he trains super fucking hard, but everything is meticulous. I haven't seen him do a single cheat rep in literally a year and a half, where he used to just do them all the time. And he's preaching all the stuff all the time. Intent, technique. And that's exactly what you should be doing at that level of development. It's, if you somehow, want to get him on here, and maybe I can message him and ask him if he wants to be on. You could ask him about his journey. I don't know what it was that set him on this path, but he was like distinctly doing bro shit a year and a half ago. And it's literally like over the course of, I think, 1 week, he was like, fuck that. He just started doing like really meticulous shit. And he can tell you about how many dividends it's paid for his physique and his fatigue and his injury stuff. It's huge. He's an advanced guy. He's almost as advanced as they get, but it's something you don't want to be too early to that party and being like, hey, I've been training 6 months. Time to do quad only isolation. It's not going to hurt you. It's not going to help a lot. Like, other people are going to be like way stronger and bigger than you. You're going to be like, why are you pretending you're Ronnie Coleman? Like you're not over here like isolating the fibers. You don't have any fibers, but you definitely don't want to be late to that party, because being late to that party means you probably got hurt on the way to that party. And injuries are something that most of them you can walk away from and heal completely, and they never bother you again. But some fraction of them, maybe 5 to 10%, they'll follow you for the rest of your career, and that's nothing you want. So,
yeah, I think unfortunately quite often it is the other way around, where you get injured and that forces you down that path versus finding it before, which is, I think, an unfortunate thing, but not. Well, no, there is stuff you can do about it, like listening to this podcast, and I'm so glad that the quality, technique, all of that, to me at least, that seems to be something for the past however long, like a while, has been really preached, and it getting further and further into even like the enhanced realm, like with Cuba and everything, which is great because that reaches more people. Like loads of people follow him. JP, part of that kind of crowd.
JP, generally speaking, JP's technique, he goes to failure more often, and he's grinding it. His technique's really good, and you won't see him do a whole lot of swinging around because he's been down that road, and it probably just didn't pay any difference. We've all been down that road. You could tell JP like, hey, why are you doing machine presses? You should be doing the barbell. And he just be like, just shut the fuck, get out of my face. The guy's like 300 pounds at like my height. It's insane. Go tell him he's not big enough. There's people do this like Ronnie Coleman worship. They're like, barbells, powerlifting. That's what you got to do what it takes. And it's like, all right, like Ronnie was one of the genetic elite who managed to not really ever get very hurt. Now it's funny because we didn't think Ronnie was hurt during his time, but he literally has stories of he's like, I came in one day, he was on the Joe Rogan podcast. It's like, I tried to lift 315 pounds and I felt weakness go down my legs. And I was like, oh my God, I can't walk. It was like, took him months to rehab that. And then eventually it turned out his back was all fucked up anyway. So, do you want to end up like that? Or do you want to end up more like Jay Cutler, who I've seen numerous occasions and talked to in the gym? He's healthy as an ox. He's like in his mid 40s. He looks great. And he was much more meticulous about his technique the entire time. He's literally on a podcast saying, I've never gone to failure a single time in my entire career. Not to say failure training is bad. It's just that Jay exhibited a different level of control and a different level of like, am I here to train the muscle or am I here to move weight around? They're the same thing for many, many years. But at some point, especially when you get big and strong, you really start giving a shit about injuries, or you don't give a shit about injuries, but you did one little cheat rep on the curl and your bicep goes bing, and you're like, ooh, ooh, ooh. You're like, I need to come back next week and not hurt myself. How am I going to do that? A lot of my best technique revelations have come from injuries. To like, okay, my shoulder's not feeling so great. I still have to train my triceps. How do I train dips in such a way that doesn't extra put pressure on my shoulder? I have to stay more upright. I have to go down slower. I have to go nice and deep to get a big stretch to sort of release the tension. All of a sudden I did that and I was prepared to be like, shit, this isn't as good for the tricep, but I'm still recovering from injury. And when I made all those changes, I'm like, oh my God, this is the best tricep pump I've had in months. Well, clearly this isn't wrong. It's actually better on every realm. I just can't use as much external load, so it's not as impressive. And, at some point you have to ask yourself, if you're really a bodybuilder, are you interested in impressing people at the gym, or are you interested in impressing them on the bodybuilding stage? And at some point, those two roads diverge.
I think this is actually partly why I'm really a fan of like the auto-regulation kind of tools that you guys at RP have particularly kind of talked about, and with like the pump, the disruption. And I don't think people want to get kind of to those maybe too soon, where they are like, I don't know, they get into the gym, they're focusing on these elements a little bit too much. They just need to get a bit
barely
stronger.
Understand,
Exactly. But when you get to that kind of late intermediate stage, going on advanced, I find those to be like, you can like exercise selection, SFR, like set volumes, you can work out like where you need to be via those. They become great teaching tools where you're saying, people might be thinking, should I be focusing on doing it that way or this way? And it's like, well, use kind of these autoregulative tools and they can kind of guide you in that way. That's been, for me as a trainee, like really like I don't want to say game changer, but I have. But even when I'm working with clients, like to be asking them these questions, they're like, I've not thought about my training this way before, and thought about how the muscles are receiving the lift and everything. They just focus on loads.
Someone can make this change very sort of with a lot of trepidation, like, oh boy, here I go, improving my technique, reducing loads. I don't know if I'm just going to turn into a pencil neck idiot, natty, untrained looking asshole, because that's how all of us look. And then all of a sudden, they do this new squat technique, and you can just ask themselves, like, how pumped are my quads relative to when I used to just bang the weight? They'd be like, actually more pumped. How disrupted are my quads? Like, I actually don't know if I can stand up out of the chair and walk out of the gym. I might need to like call the ambulance to get me home. You might have 99 problems, but training hard enough for your quads is not one of them. Because like, if you're already so pumped that you could barely move your quads, and if you're already so disrupted that you can't even walk, what is there more to do to your quads? There's no amount of heavy lifting is going to ever, say, oh no, but you did it wrong. You could have been training harder. Like, really? Like, hard how? It's like saying like, hey, this meal is going to be really filling, and you're so full you physically want to throw up, and someone's like, you're eating wrong, you need to eat more. It's like, eat more? How the fuck can I eat more? Like, there's physically no room in my stomach. So if you have those check boxes, you don't have to be in this mystery world where you're guessing like, ooh, yeah, I guess I'm doing all the stuff Revive Stronger says to do, but I don't know if I'm growing. If you're getting nasty pumps and you're getting a ton of disruption, man, maybe you could be training less and actually progressing, because you could be doing too much at that point, but not doing enough is not a question if you're doing things right. In other words, very, very short words, if you do this focus on technique and eccentric and positioning that we're talking about, you will know in that session that you're doing the right thing. You don't have to like hold your breath and be like, God, please result in muscle growth. You will know if you've been training your lats some way, it's been working fine, but you're heaving the weight. All of a sudden, if you clean up your technique and you do it right, you're going to be like, oh my God, my lats are, I can't even move my arms back. You'll know right away. And you'll be like, why the fuck did I ever train in a different way altogether?
I think it's particularly saved me, just as a slight anecdote, this contest prep, where I know 2017, when I was kind of a bit new to some of these things, somewhat, I didn't know it as well as I know it now, of course. My volume, I think I could look back at my volume within my fat loss mesocycles, and I would just like be adding sets here, everywhere. Like my volume would get mad. And I look at it now and I'm like, barely moved from week one. Like I'm just like, I shouldn't be doing more. And that's been really helped me this cut so far, where I'm just like not torturing myself and just like fucking around in the gym basically.
Right. And it's something that Eric Helms has said very well, and I've expounded upon in a few, actually a triple series of YouTube videos on the Renaissance channel, is you get your quality of training set first. Once your quality is high, if needed, you mess with how much training you're doing. But if you're training poor quality, like, hey, yeah, you can do all kinds of more volume and you just pay for it in systemic fatigue.
Yeah. Fantastic. Cool. We're getting to the next question, which is actually very similar lines to this one. It says, Manoli Bergen has asked, how important...
I know who that is.
Oh, you do? Awesome. So he said, how important is it to feel the stretch on an exercise for hypertrophy?
Look, some exercises don't offer much of a stretch, and that's just the limitation of the exercise selection, which isn't to say they're bad, they're just different. Like on a bicep curl with a barbell, it's mechanically almost impossible to feel a stretch at the bottom because your bicep actually stretches back here. It doesn't stretch down here. But that being said, the recent accumulation of literature is very, very good for stretch under tension. And the mechanistic research has been very thoroughly figured out with humans and animals. So it looks like stretch under load is a very powerful driver of hypertrophy. And we're not 100% sure about that, because in science, you don't really get to be 100% sure, but gee whiz, we're really pretty fucking sure about it. And if you integrate this with the idea of what we actually see in the gym, like everyone we've ever taken at Renaissance through these YouTube workouts, we teach them how to do stretch under load. And after like one or two sets, they look at us, they're like, something's wrong with my pecs. I don't know what's going on. And like, what's wrong? Like, they're so pumped, I can't move. Like, this is insane. And I'm only using whatever 30 pounds for flies. If you try it yourself, the stretch makes such a huge difference. And actually, you could try the inverse. Steve, you ever travel and you get to like a hack squat that won't let you bottom out, or a chest press that won't let you bottom out, and you do it a set, and someone you're with is like, how's that hack squat? You're like, I might as well be fucking just using my own body weight at this point. I hate it. It's worse because it hurts my joints a lot.
Yeah.
I have to use like 400 kilos, and I don't even feel a stretch in my quads. I don't feel like I'm not getting a pump. I'm not getting disrupted. I could just do 10 sets and walk away. So my idea is on the exercises that will allow it, and making sure to choose the exercises more often that do allow it. Stretch under tension is a really, really good thing. Now, here's a couple of caveats. One, it shouldn't hurt the joint. If it hurts the joint, you're like, oh, I love the stretch on these dips, but my shoulders are going to pop out. Don't do that. Another one is make sure the stretch is on the target muscle, not other muscles. So for example, if you do a deep enough fly, at some point the stretch is on your bicep instead of on your pecs. And then like, well, they're bicep flies. And it's actually kind of like a stiff-legged deadlift or a good morning. For your hamstring, those flies are that for your biceps. Great bicep growth. You'll actually get sore biceps if you do a completely straight on fly, super deep. But, never mind, might not be that great for your shoulders, but certainly not doing much for your pecs. So you have to make sure that the stretch is on the target muscle and that the tension produced by the muscle is still high. You don't want to get into a situation where the muscle is so stretched that you literally feel as if you can't connect to it and produce a ton of tension. Because if you stretch muscles beyond a certain point, there's a feedback system that keeps the muscle safe from ripping and keeps them from ripping the joint that says, hey, like if you stretch a muscle beyond this point, the nervous system just isn't going to tell you to contract the muscle very hard. So at that point, you're just kind of like training like a really advanced weighted yoga, and you're not really a bodybuilder anymore. But to a certain point, a very deep stretch, the deeper, the better. And there's some muscles that are self-limiting in their stretch, so you don't have to worry about that. So like triceps, there's physically no way to go too deep because your fucking bicep is in the way. For quads, almost always, you just go to complete knee flexion and your butt hits your hamstrings. All the way, the further you go, the better. It's not the same, pecs, the pecs have a limit. You can stretch your pecs to such an extent that you lose a ton of force production. And there's some other muscles that are good examples of that. But generally speaking, on average, going very deep for a stretch pays big dividends. It's also very safe, especially if you do it slow and under control. It's kind of the best of a lot of worlds, and it standardizes your technique really well. I have all kinds of really good things to say about it.
Awesome. Yeah, I know. You can, again, probably more for the intermediate to advanced guys, but you can feel it. Like I've done it on flies where you feel it. It's like, oh, that's now come off my chest. I'm going to kind of cut ROM a little bit here. So I'm keeping it here. So, and then the only one I was thinking of was on preacher curls. I don't know, like on the bottom there, that's where I'm like, I have to be very careful because I think that's quite I've heard of people kind of ripping things within their, I guess the tendons within the elbow there. That's where you have to really control that.
Almost all of that is because you're using way too much weight. But if the bottom of a preacher curl, because when you lock out your elbows completely, when the bicep shortens, it actually pulls bone into bone, which isn't bad. But in order to overcome this, the fulcrum there is really short for the bicep because it's laying flat. So it's kind of like if you close a door by its door handle, you're like, okay, it's easy. It's closing a door. Try grabbing the door really close to the hinges and closing it. You're like, have to exert a ton of force to get it going. So sometimes if you're using even a decent technique and a decent amount of weight, if you completely lock out your joint with the bicep on the bottom of a preacher curl, it might be a huge amount of force your bicep have to exert at a very stretched position to even get your bone to get your joint to go this at all. Now, as soon as it does this, the bicep gets a huge mechanical advantage and the rest is much easier. But that bottom, at the very least, has to be very well controlled. And if it's really just hurting a ton at the bottom and your elbow joints start hurting because of the bone compression, you got to maybe cut the ROM just a little bit so that you don't come down all the way to full lockout. Maybe you come down to like here. There's a difference here and here, here and here, right? Come down to here and you're fine. Come down to here and it just hurts your joints a lot. So
that makes complete sense.
It's a very good point you bring up, Steve.
Cool. Let's get to the next question. So that's from Samuel Dahl, and he has asked, do you think the future of hypertrophy will be showing anything revolutionary that makes hypertrophy training much different than it is from now?
I think the advanced drug scene, mostly developed for folks with things like muscular dystrophy, is going to get really insane over the next 10 years to 15 years, maybe sooner. So this might be a little bit revelatory for some folks. Everything is chemical at the end of the day in the human body. The only reason that training with weights causes your muscles to grow is because of a series of molecular machines that detect tension and actually activate growth pathways. Now, if you have a drug or a gene therapy that just activates those growth pathways without the tension, your body can't tell the difference. It just grows the same amount of muscle. So I think eventually they'll have such powerful drugs for muscular dystrophy that you're going to be able to take them and get same or more growth for the long term for your body that would result from resistance training. There are some limitations to that. Drugs are very difficult to target to specific muscles because usually they're either oral or injectable and they sort of go systemically to the whole body. So you get like a really, really jacked face. You'll get really jacked abs and core and weird shit. Your muscles some of the muscles close to your thumb will get really big, so look kind of strange, like a myostatin deficient cow, basically.
Yeah.
Now, there may be a situation where you could be on the lower levels of those drugs, and then you resistance train half of as hard as you used to. The systemic fatigue is like some kind of joke that you only need to deal with once every 12 weeks, and you get the same or better growth than you did before. So I think on the molecular chemical side, gene therapy side, humble prediction is if there's no massive disruption to the global economy, and if the United States, Israeli, because they do a crazy amount of drug development research, and Western European drug research doesn't get overly regulated to the point where they just don't approve some projects for human testing. My humble prediction is when the next 30 or 40 years, and I would say that's a very late timeline, people won't really be exercising for muscle growth anymore outside of just pure recreation. I think it'll be pills you take or gene therapies you get to where you just choose how muscular you are. And it just nothing else matters. I honestly think that's probably the case. They have gene modifications and drug modifications in mice. They've had this for years, where they give the mouse this drug and it actually replicates seemingly every single thing about exercise, aerobic exercise, just a pill. So these mice don't do anything and they don't go on the treadmill and they just sit around and get this drug, and then you throw them on the treadmill and they have the same or better endurance, the same or better cardiovascular capacity, and the same or better muscular handling and fat deposition as mice who've just been running on the treadmill for fucking 12 hours a day. And holy shit. You think about what is it? The mice that run the 12-hour-a-day mice stimulate certain pathways with fat, and the drug mice stimulate the same pathways with fat. At the end of the day, there's a few central regulators of muscularity or endurance adaptations. As long as you stimulate them somehow, the body doesn't really give a fuck where that comes from. Some senses can't even tell, and then you just get the same result. So I didn't really answer the question because I think the question was like, is there anything in hypertrophy training? So let me try to answer that one. I think there's a potential for some of these muscle stim machines to get better, and some research may support that they're better. So, for example, if you have certain muscles which are really hard for you to activate and get to feeling sore and stuff like that, I think proper placement of these stim machines might actually have a good benefit because they can let you contract those muscles with the help of the machine that contracts them much more than you could yourself. That's good for one reason of raw stimulus magnitude could be higher because you're just getting more work done as far as the muscle is concerned. And the other one is actually your systemic fatigue may be much lower because you don't have to try hard, and the psychological fatigue costs a lot. And if you can get the same contractions to the pecs as by pushing 50% with your own mind and 50% with a machine, the systemic fatigue could be very, very different. So potentially that could be a big thing. Now the problem is most of the folks using these machines now, they wouldn't know proper exercise technique if it got up and hit them in the dick. And for a lot of them, it's just a giant waste of time. I'm not sure the machines in their current form actually stimulate the deep musculature that you need to in order to get really good growth. But I think eventually something like that might be much more usable, much more interface user friendly. So you might have a wireless version where you stick these pads on your biceps and you turn up the juice to a certain extent, and they could actually be feedback designed by where the machine actually detects when you're contracting your bicep voluntarily, and it's not on normally, but it gives a signal boost. So as soon as you go do this, it does the artificial electrical manipulation for you, and all of a sudden you contract your biceps way more than you would in waking life. Slap them on your glutes, slap them on your quads, slap them on whatever muscle is weak, and all of a sudden, whatever kind of movement you're doing is way, way, way more effective. That could be a really, really cool thing. So I think that might be something that develops down the road.
So on that, I imagine what we currently have is the principles of hypertrophy with effort, load, like intensity, relative intensity, volume, frequency. You don't imagine that's going to revolutionary, like some massive change, like we've all been doing something wrong, or you think that's all going to be pretty much, or maybe it's even unnecessary because we don't fucking give a shit anymore. We've got the gene therapy.
Sure. So definitely that is a possibility. But what I would say is my estimate on a revolutionary change is probably low probability, but a really decent marginal change is probably pretty high. So for example, exercise frequency is a big contentious topic. How many sessions per week training for biceps, maximize your bicep size. I think over the next 5 to 10 years, the research on that will become much more fine-tuned to where the recommendations can be much more of, hey, like this is really in this situation for this amount of time, this is the best. And in this situation for this amount of time, this other thing that we used to say, well, works just as well, actually is kind of the wrong answer. It's like if dogs will eat any kind of dog food you give them pretty much. But if dogs could somehow be upgraded to human intelligence and could talk, they could tell you a lot more about which food they like and don't like. We just don't know. We aren't able to measure it. So maybe if we are able to measure muscular responses at a deeper level, we are able to infer, these frequencies cause these adaptations, which in the short term are the same and in the long term aren't as good. So maybe we'll have more insight like that. I find that very likely to occur. Because right now for example, on the RP muscular guides recommendations, it's like 2 to 5, sessions per week. I think we could probably do better than that. I think we'll learn much more about what the cutoffs are like with loads that are too high, loads that are too low, repetition ranges. I think we'll probably see maybe some more objective way to measure rest times. Like there may be some way to measure how ready your muscles are to really stimulate hypertrophy again. And you could have maybe put some kind of nanotech pad on your biceps, and the pad is you go, and it turns blue, and then you stop. And when it turns completely bright green again, your muscles are ready enough to really recruit their fastest fibers. And, right now, it's just kind of guessing. We have the whole 4-factor model, which probably does a really good job, but that nanotech can actually measure the muscle recovery at the level of the molecular machinery. And then when it turns bright green, like your muscles are ready. And you're like, oh, this is awesome because it's completely objective. I don't have to guess anymore. It's like the difference between having a GPS on your phone and having paper and pencil trip mapped out on a map. Like one of them just it gets you where you need to go, but gee, you're going to make some mistakes. It's going to take a long time. Whereas the other one is like as precise as it gets. So maybe something like that.
Hi guys, Steve here. Just wanted to take a moment of your time to remind you of our online coaching service. At Revive Stronger, we pride ourselves on providing personalized service that will take your physique and knowledge to the next level. If you're interested, check the description and sign up. That's very cool. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I'm just thinking on the line of like bodybuilding will just be gone if there's this gene therapy. It feels like part of the reason I think a lot of us do it is for the training, and we enjoy that and the process. I'm like, what's that going to replace? There's got to be something something there, but
I will say, so anabolics are huge already at their effects, but we still have bodybuilding. And the thing is, all those therapies, unless they're very specific to the muscle, you still have to train because you want some muscles to get bigger than others. Like if you just want to have a big waist, and so it's kind of been known in bodybuilding for like probably 2 decades now. If you just want to be really big for whatever genetics allow, you just take a crap load of gear, a crap load of insulin, a crap load of growth hormone, and eat a ton. You'll get really big. So the problem is your waist will get big, and then all the muscles that you have will just get genetically as big as they could have relative to each other. So you don't look that great. Balance and symmetry sucks. So then with average genetics, how do you improve your balance and symmetry? We've got to be able to really, really grow some of your muscles, like your shoulders and outer quads, and really not grow others, like your abs, for example, or your obliques. And like you're taking off your tactical vest there, Steve. So
the weighted vest, my back's aching. I need it off. I've done my time today.
There you go, your bulletproof vest. So basically, at the end of the day, there's still a huge amount of nuance that you have to play in as the athlete, and they may still be 30 years from now. The real other thing that I think is coming, this is a total aside, just, intellectually curious viewers might want to hear this and let it bump around in their heads for a bit. I think there's a big revolution coming of virtual reality. I think it's been brewing for a while. All the futurists predict that it's going to happen. And I think we're going to be living more and more of our lives in either augmented reality, where it's, for example, you have contact lenses. If you're driving down the road and you're like, I wonder what gas stations are over in that town. And you look at that town and it instantly loads all the gas stations with giant arrows as if they're pointing from the sky. It says, go here. And you go, ooh, you kind of touch the arrow in space and it turns green. And then your self-driving car just goes there, right? So it's augmented reality. And then there's pure virtual reality, which, you sit back in your comfy chair, you close your eyes, and then all of a sudden through weird, at first relatively simple technology and eventually very advanced technology, you'll be living in imagine Facebook, but it's 3-dimensional and you get to talk to people. Social media will be upgraded to such a crazy extent that I think people will be spending more and more time in social media. And just like a video game, you're going to be able to make yourself look like whatever you want. So what your body actually looks like will become incrementally less and less interesting. So I think that's coming in the next 10 to 20 years, maybe even sooner. And then maybe sports like bodybuilding, powerlifting will still exist and be super fun, but maybe they won't attract as much attention for the average young person growing up as they used to before. Then again, the global population is always increasing. So maybe they'll still get super popular. Here's one thought, like India and China are growing middle class very rapidly. At some point, their middle class will be as wealthy. In 20 years, India's average income will be higher than the United Kingdom is today. Plus, a lot of people are going to want to do all kinds of stuff people in the UK do now, like bodybuilding and stuff. So, the Indian bodybuilding scene in 20 years might be this insane thing with millions of people doing it. So there's always that kind of thing. Never mind the African bodybuilding scene. I mean, what happens when, in 20 years, Nigeria becomes the same per capita wealth as the United States? Holy shit. I mean, nobody who's not Nigerian is going to be winning anything. It's like the UFC is like half of the current champs are Nigerian. So there's all kinds of really cool stuff that can happen there. But I think eventually everything's going to end up transferring, or most things, to a digital world. So that's just something to keep an eye on.
And this somewhat is on the same lines in terms of you had your discussion, you had your presentation on RP on veganism, which has obviously been growing loads. And I imagine that's going to go somewhere in future as well. But I just want to bring it up because I know we discussed it last time and I listened to your debate and then I've watched that video and for me, it was great. So I just want to recommend it to people.
Thank
your
you so
thoughts
much, Steve.
Outside of bodybuilding always impress me by how meticulous you are and kind of you think outside the box. I think a lot of people put themselves in a box. So it's quite nice to have that, the kind of where you are in terms of veganism and thinking about it as a spectrum rather than like you're either vegan or you're absolutely not. That was helpful for me as someone who is conscious of this sort of thing, but isn't comfortable going all in.
For sure. And thank you so much, Steve, for the kind words. And that video is on Renaissance. It's like 10 reasons to go vegan. A bit of a clickbait title. We do actually talk about 10 reasons, but it's the spectrum. Each one's a spectrum, and it's go vegan or not. I just will say one quick, so if you're looking for the shortest summary ever, the biggest argument vegans have is against factory farming. Not just factory farming, but specifically factory farming that is really, really like, causes a lot of suffering. And if you can reduce the suffering, substantially increase the quality of life for the animals, most of the arguments for veganism, I won't say disappear, but lose a lot of their steam. So if we could have situations where animals would be farmed very, very ethically, slaughtered very ethically, some of the vegans are, I don't know, I don't think they're trolling, they're serious. One guy was like, what is that? What does ethical slaughter even mean? It's like, well, there's two ways to die. One way is you get a gangrene infection in nature and you die over the course of 2 months of writhing fucking agony and pain, or you get a lethal injection, which you're happy and everything's going great, and then you're just shut off and no one, there is such a thing as ethical slaughter. So if the animals are like, if you have a chicken that runs around for 1 or 2 years and is happy as ever out in what it thinks is the wild, and then it just like nanotech just shuts it down and it just collapses and never even feels a thing. Actually no suffering occurs. Then chickens, or cows or whatever in captivity don't face disease. They don't face predation. It's actually a better life for them. Imagine aliens were farming humans for food. There's a few other considerations, but the aliens let you live a 200-year-long life, just insanely fulfilling life where you didn't have to worry about money or anything. You just hang out with your friends for 200 years. And then you don't even know you were going to die. You just kind of lapsed out and, there's no you to be aware anymore. Can we say that's some kind of ethical disaster? Like, I don't know, man, compared to life in like, Bangladesh right now, it's 50 trillion times better. So it's kind of like, I think vegans are on their strongest foot when they say we really need to reduce animal suffering. And they're on their weakest position when they say any kind of meat consumption is a terrible idea. And at that point, there's a lot of nuance there, it can be argued.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting to think about the animal's intellect and how I think, at least I'd probably done it myself where I'd kind of given an animal human emotions or intelligence and
anthropomorphization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's just not there, which helped me a lot.
For sure. Well, it's one of the things is like anticipation. Like the animals know they're going to die. Like, do they really? I don't know. Like there's lots of humans that are in situations which we know they're going to die. They don't know they're going to die. So it's kind of like, the suffering that occurs from anticipating death is massive and we can really relate to it. If you don't anticipate death, there's not a lot of suffering going. You're just going bebopping on your way around and all of a sudden you're dead. It's very, very different. Still bad. Still killing is bad. Death is bad. It's a very different kind of thing than an animal that like grows up in a wildly uncomfortable situation, is in fucking agony its whole life, anticipating its own death and finally dies. That's way worse. And if we can make farming first such that it does much less of that bad stuff and much more decent stuff, then we've already had a huge victory and we didn't have to convince everyone to drop meat out of their diet completely. Unfortunately, vegans have this thing where you can tell they're all coming from a really great place. They're really, emoting about it. They're really emotional about it. And what they end up doing is just pissing a lot of people off. And if you want to convince people not to be vegan, you just take the average emotional 17-year-old high school vegan and put them in a room of meat eaters, and you'll convince half the room they're never going to go vegan, just out of spite because the person's a fucking asshole. And if you want to convince someone to go vegan, maybe a more nuanced approach of like, hey, maybe factory farming is kind of gross and terrible. And a lot of people will be like, yeah, no, it's totally, I would gladly pay 50 cents or $1 more per pound of meat to know that the cows had a pretty decent life. A lot of people would do that. So
awesome. Time for one more question?
Time for one more.
Cool. We'll go with Juiced Sattler, and I think it's a he. When I reach my last week in a meso with no RAR, I get a rapid decline in the amount of reps that I can achieve in subsequent sets of the first exercise, and also in the following exercises for the same muscle group. I cannot prolong my rest time between sets because I have to fit my workout within a fixed time frame. I don't have this rep drop-off issue with 1 RAR. Should I end my meso with 1 RAR, or is this decline in performance okay for hypertrophy? Is this a common problem or person specific?
Super common, not really a problem. It's actually just bumping into the reality that failure training causes enormous amounts of systemic and local fatigue, which is why people who train to failure every session, you got to wonder, like, gee, you could be doing a lot more volume, a lot higher quality, and growing much more if you just didn't go to failure all the time. So this is a great argument against go to failure every week. But if you go to failure in your last week of training, you're deloading next week anyway, so who cares? And because you're going to failure and having that drop off, you're probably still getting a ton of hypertrophic stimulus. It's just not something that you would sustainably want to go to. And here's another problem. So if we knew for a fact that you hit 1 RIR, we might actually never go to failure. One of the main reasons, at least at RP, we recommend going to failure more or less at the end of every mesocycle for hypertrophy, or almost everyone, is to shit test yourself to see if you're really not training hard enough. Because you could think on 1 RIR, really push to failure, you might hit a rep, you might hit 4 more reps than you did the week before. And you're like, okay, well, I was lying to myself. Then next time when you train a little harder and everything works better. So one of the number one reasons to go to 0 RIR or to go to failure is to really know that you're in the right relative effort range to begin with. It's kind of like an automatic resetting process. So if you say, well, I'm always going to stop at 1 RIR, my next question to you is, how do you know that's 1 RIR? I know 1 RIR feels like. Totally, for the first few months, but then you keep training for the first few months, and then the second few months, and 6 months later, you're PRing everything's going well, but you do a set of 10 with 350 pounds on the squat. You say that's 1 RIR. How do you know for sure? You don't. The answer is you don't. So maybe next week, push it a little further, and you get 13 reps, and you're like, fuck. All right. Or you get 11 and you're like, oh, see, told you it was 1 RIR. Because you can't be too sure, at least every now and again, at least every few mesocycles, you should push things in the last week to failure or 0 RIR. Your last rep was like you don't need to go down again. We know you're not coming up. You've been training long enough to know that. So I think it's important to push the limits on occasion, if for nothing than a detection perspective. But to his point, when you go to failure, your performance drops off a ton. It's a bad thing. It's a bad thing. I would even say that in his case, the total hypertrophic stimulus for that last week going to failure might not be as high. So super advanced, only do this if you're very advanced. If you don't understand the context for which this applies, if this doesn't make sense when I explain it, please don't try it. If you understand exactly what I'm saying, by all means try it. Maybe the first set for this individual, he can, in that last week before deload, he can go to failure to peg those numbers of what's my performance. And then all the sets after, he could do 1 RIR. Because that first set will fuck up his second set, but because second set is 1 RIR, not failure again, that third set might be even more reps or just the same. So you can continue to get really high quality work. That makes sense. So maybe just that first tester set is 0 RIR and the rest of them just do true 1 RIR. Because now that you know what 0 RIR is, it's not that hard to know what 1 RIR is. And you can keep going. That again, if you have any questions about how to apply that, don't do it. If it's completely obvious to you why that works, give it a try.
Yeah. On a related note, Mike, I think this is the question I mean to ask. It's something that comes up sometimes with clients who are using this same rep beat or basically increase a load by a little bit or beat reps by a little bit each week once you've started off at a point where reps are getting hard. So 3 to 4 RIR essentially. Mm-hmm. And sometimes people will see they do 100 for 10 and then 8. And then the next week they do 105 for 10 and then 6. And then they do they see as they get closer to failure, like he's kind of describing, their reps afterwards will drop off and potentially even the average number will drop in terms of the kind of, if you sum every set and divide it by the number of sets. Should you expect as you get closer to failure, the knock-on fatigue to the other ones is going to be greater, so you're going to see more drop off? Or the way I've always thought about it is kind of relative, because you're maintaining the RIR and you're training within MRV, you should be able to kind of match reps and increase load, and it should just be 10, 8, 10, 8, 10, 8, 6, 10, 8, 6, and you're just increasing load every week. Yeah, that's a kind of perfect scenario. I don't know if that question made sense.
Makes a ton of sense. Okay. The gold standard of is my performance still up and am I at MRV is your first fresh set for that muscle group that day. And at the end of the day, if that's not declining, you're probably okay, and you probably can say you haven't hit MRV. And then the decline in reps after is just a consequence of that fatigue from the first set. Now, that brings up another question of, if I go that hard and I start losing reps, let's say I do 4 sets this week versus 4 sets last week, but this week I actually got less total volume of work, even though I hit a PR in my first set, the other sets were such a disaster, then actually you should be aware of that. and probably not push too far into that void. So what I would say is if you're starting, even if your first set is still a PR, if you're starting to get notable volume load reductions in the first exercise, like you did a set of 15 in the bent row last week, this week's also 15 in the first one. Last week it was 10-8-6, and this one it's 6-3-2. Technically, because you hit 15 in the first set, maybe you're not an MRV, but now this is so understimulative here that you're probably training so hard that you can't even train enough to stimulate, and it's probably time for you to deload and time for you to pull back and go a little bit easier. So I would say that if you have notable reductions in the first, now the second exercise, whatever, you're tired, it makes sense. It's fine. It's okay for your performance to be reduced because you're putting in so much stimulus in the first exercise. But if it's your first exercise, 4 or 5 sets, and the total volume load is dropped significantly, I would say for most mesocycles, that is not an indicator of progression. That is not an indicator of good recovery. And even if you could somehow muster that first set to still be a PR, I would say it's better to plan to have your sets all sort of hit where they're supposed to hit. Another good thing with that is as you do more and more weeks of the same exercise, you get so good at that exercise and you get into better shape cardio-wise and everything that if you take the same amount of rest time or you auto-regulate your rest to where you're ready to go again, a lot of times the reps stay elevated because your fitness is increasing so fast. And once that's no longer happening, yeah, you should probably stop. Another way we see this artifact is when people have distinct timed rests, which I'm against generally, not in every case, but in most cases, because we have to check that 4-factor rest model. Like, is the muscle itself recovered? Is your cardiovascular system recovered? Are you ready to go again? Are the synergists good to go again? And that may change in a set of 15 with 225 pounds in a row. You may need 3.5 minutes of rest before you do your next set to really, really fully recover to go again. But, last week or 2 weeks ago, that same set of 15 at 210 pounds, after 2 minutes, you might have been ready to go. And if you have the same exact 2 minutes rest between every set, well, the sets get harder as you go, and 2 minutes is less and less and less. So all of a sudden, you're in a position where you're like, oh shit, it's 2 minutes, but I'm going to only be able to do 5 reps here. I did 8 last week. We'll take more time to rest. And I know he said in the thing he can't rest any longer. Then for him, he's reaching to a point where if your volume load is significantly reduced, it's time to deload and cut out.
Perfect. Awesome. Mike, thank you so much. I think everyone always enjoys these tons. So I want to say a massive thank you and thank you all for listening. Have you got anything in the pipeline at RP? I know generally just loads of great content over on YouTube, but I don't know if there's anything in the pipeline that you can talk about.
Top secret stuff, but it's coming. And when it's sufficiently well developed, we'll reveal it. Always working on stuff. I will say, I just want to give it a shout out to one of my friends in the industry. Menno Henselmans has a new book. He didn't actually message me anything about this. He never mentioned it. I just follow him on Instagram. And he has a new book. It's highly recommended. Everything Menno puts out is worth a look. And also, I would just say, like, if you're on Instagram, follow Menno Henselmans on Instagram because he posts a bunch of scientific reviews and a bunch of comments on single studies that are just really, like, if you want to take your analytical abilities and your deep understanding of training science to that next level, Menno's a guy to follow because, like, you could get really great recommendations from following a bunch of sources, like myself and Steve, for example. But if you want that next level of like, ooh, but have you considered this? And you're like, fuck, I never even thought about that part of training. Menno's the guy thinking about that. There's just a few guys in the field that are really at that next level cost. Some of our stuff, you and I, Steve, we definitely reach into that, but then we broadcast to a slightly more general audience. So it's not every time you get that more advanced stuff. But folks like Menno Henselmans, Eric Trexler, Greg Knuckles, depending on which way he's going, because he does a lot of Gen Pop stuff, at times Eric Helms, and there's many other people I can name, but those are the guys you want to follow to really, really, really bend your brain for you, to make you think at a deeper level, because then you will be able to innovate, first of all. And second of all, you'll have such a deep understanding that you'll be able to develop really deep principles and flexibility in your thinking to help your own clients and help yourself. Like, if you know the deep undercurrent of what's going on, you can solve unique problems on principles. But if you just know how to kind of do it the right way, but then your unique case shows up and you're like, I don't know how to make sense of this. If you don't understand the deep mechanisms, good luck. You just have to hire a coach to tell you what to do, or read 5 books at the same time to explain it. I think guys like Menno are really worth the read. If you consider yourself an advanced thinker, I read all of this stuff. I read all of everything advanced that Helms, Trexler, Knuckles, and Menno put out, and a few other guys. I read as much of it as I can. James Krieger's another one, where a lot of the stuff he does is for Gen Pop, but then he gets really nitty gritty as research review. those guys are really the people you should be looking at, because they probably don't have a ton to offer as far as like revolutionary shit of like, oh, I can't believe you didn't know this. It's not going to put 5 pounds of muscle on your body in 5 months, but it will over time be able to make you a better coach for yourself. And especially if you train clients, it'll make you a way better coach, because you'll understand at a much deeper level. And when new stuff comes up and people are like, hey, what about this new training style? You'll be able to analyze it on the principles and be like, oh, that's actually really good. Or, oh, that's good in this context. Or you can be like, this is a total waste of time because it contradicts everything we know at a deep level. Whereas if you're only surface level understanding, you're going to look at it and be like, seems like it could work, but if you knew more, you would realize that it's a really stupid idea. Funny enough, Menno had a really good post on a study about intermittent fasting that I shared a few days ago. And he, if you don't follow Menno, you could be out there doing intermittent fasting and think this is the greatest thing ever. You follow him for a while and you're like, ooh, yeah, in some contexts it's good, and some it's a really bad idea. And you wouldn't know the context unless you were following guys like that. Because I think a lot of folks who would read some of his stuff or Greg Knuckles' stuff, at first they'd be like, Jesus, nerd, Christ, the fuck am I reading? Stupid formulas and symbols and references, and it's just dumb as shit. Just tell me how to train. That's good enough. If you don't like it, that's cool. But if you want that next level, those are the guys to follow.
I can definitely.
I didn't rep any of my own RP shit.
That's all right. I think hopefully everyone listening to this is already over and following you, and I hope, and I think the majority of them will be following those guys as well. But I could definitely second all those recommendations. So that's fantastic, guys. Again, thank you for listening. Thank you, Mike, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care. So I'm Steve Hall, founder of Revive Stronger and a coach of Revive Stronger.
My name is Pascal Flor. I'm the co-owner of Revive Stronger and also a coach, of course.
Revive Stronger has probably been going solidly for 3 years, roughly about 3 years.
Revive Stronger, to me, it is becoming kind of my child, my foster child. It's the gathering and getting together of like-minded people.
We've been expanding the coaching team, which is helping us help more people, but each coach can only help a certain number of people.
Right now, it's all over the place. We have YouTube, we have Facebook, we have Instagram, but there isn't that community aspect behind that.
And so the next step for us is developing a membership site.
So basically, we want to create a family and a community that is then benefiting from another.
A really cool community for people within our little niche is going to be a website.
They will get early access to our podcast.
You can access us, ask us questions.
The community aspect, we have a forum there. You can ask questions, but also you can log your journey.
There's also going to be courses on there.
Courses, presentations on different topics. Discount of past seminar footage. We will log our journey as well. We'll start vlogging.
We're going to have documentaries.
Our entire athletic journey. Furthermore, they get access to an exercise video library.
The exercises that we love for hypertrophy and maximizing hypertrophy, we're going to go through those in depth, telling you how to execute them.
We kept them concise and also mobile friendly so that you can watch them in between your sets.
I'm super excited to grow this community. The amount of value that we're going to be delivering is huge. And I'd love you to be part of it.
You will get so much out of that.
I'll see you inside.